Ms. Mathernova, welcome to Georgia again. It's always a great pleasure to have you in Georgia. The European Union, European Commission is very strong supporter of Georgia's integration and a great partner for Georgia. It's a great pleasure for us, for the talk show world as such, to have such a distinguished guest. So welcome to Georgia.
Thank you very much, Madlova.
Thank you. Ms. Mathernova, what is on your agenda for this visit? I know you're frequently coming to Georgia. I know you are doing a lot for Georgia and for Georgia's reformation process and Georgia's integration process in the European Union. Your department, your directorate is doing a great job in supporting in this important process for Georgia. So what did bring you to Georgia this time?
Well, thank you for having me here. It's always a pleasure to address people in the listening audience through the TV. And getting the message of the EU directly to people. Well, to your question, the reason for my trip is threefold. The timing of it is the Open Government Partnership Summit, and I would like to congratulate Georgia for hosting it and for taking the leadership of this incredibly important initiative at a time when things we thought that were given and cast in stone are suddenly in doubt. When the trust in institutions is eroding, it's really important to have a gathering like this, and it's very nice to see that Tbilisi is it. So that's the reason, and that's the first reason for coming, but also the timing of it. But there are two other reasons why I came. A second is to meet the new government. I had a meeting with and colleagues with the Prime Minister yesterday, as well as the new Minister of Finance, and we had a meeting today with the new Minister of Regional Development and Infrastructure, and to discuss the priorities, to discuss how EU assistance can be of service and support to the reform path of Georgia, how the new plan of the government meshes with what we've been doing so far, and I'm very happy to say that there is very good correlation. And the third reason why I came is to visit Kakheti. It was my first time in Kakheti. My colleagues all laughed because I've been obsessed about seeing the Mimino airport, because many years ago, I had seen Mimino movie, and since then I had this dream of visiting Tel Aviv and seeing the airport with the backdrop of the Caucasus Mountains behind it. So I'm very happy to say the dream was fulfilled on Monday, and we in fact had a very good visit to this incredibly important region for Georgia, whether it's the wine production, whether it's the tourism, whether it's the agricultural production, and met with the local authorities, with the governor and his office, and discussed how we can help on regional diversification and regional development for Georgia. So those are the three reasons why I'm here now.
Very important that you have visited the regions, and one of beloved region for many in Europe, in European Union, and it's really full of tourists these days. And I know that European Union and European Commission is supporting Georgia's small and medium enterprises to develop. But in a larger picture, it's really huge support provided by the European Union through its financial institutions. EBRD has in general, European Union, since the independence and since the cooperation started between European Union and Georgia, has provided more than 4 billion euro support, and correct me if I'm wrong. And the portfolio of European Bank for Reconstruction and Development has the more than 3 billion euros, and actual portfolio is up to 1 billion right now, and about 200 projects are ongoing. So it was just concluded the project of rehabilitation of the highway close to Tbilisi, to the Britannia direction. And what are the impressions? Is it working correctly? The spending of European money is going in the right direction, and is it bringing the benefits to Georgian citizens and Georgia as a state? What are your impressions?
Well, this is a big question, and I'll try to answer short, and then I'll try to expand on my answer.
Please do.
My short answer is yes. And the reason why I'm saying yes for the correct spending is that, in fact, the World Bank made something called Systematic Country Diagnostic report some month ago, maybe half a year ago, for Georgia. And it was, in fact, very rewarding and gratifying to read that every single issue that was identified as a challenge for the Georgian economy, for the Georgian government, and for the Georgian society, every single issue was addressed through our programming, whether our bilateral programming, whether our programming through what we call regional programs. The regional programs are those that address all 6 countries of the Eastern Partnership, or whether through our collaboration with, as you mentioned, the international financial institutions. And this was very important because also issues where, for example, you mentioned the whole area of access to credit, and especially access to credit for the small guys, for the small micro enterprises that exist, is something that we feel is a problem in Georgia, and that's exactly what we discussed yesterday with the Prime Minister, that the large banks easily provide credit to large enterprises. It's the small enterprises that have a bigger problem. Is something that we already rolled out 3 or 4 different programs to support SMEs, micro enterprises, for example, a program for microcredit in lari, in local currency. But what we have also done is to commission a broader study to develop the non-banking access to credit. You know, leasing, factoring, collateral lending, inventory lending, all the type of access to finance that exists in all developed economies that is not reliant on banks. Because you have very strong banks, you have very good banks, but banks will always be the more conservative element, right? There is always a segment of enterprises that doesn't get touched or doesn't get affected by bank lending, and it's this kind of lending that we'd like to address through developing alternatives to bank lending that exists in any modern economy. So I would say, to come back to your question, I think that our financing is effective, and I think that the demonstration of it is the fact that we are addressing all the key weaknesses or challenges. But this is not to say that there is not areas to improve. The largest room.
Which one?
Well, the largest room in the world is the room for improvement. So what we just discussed with the Minister of Regional Development over lunch, in fact, was looking for ways to develop programs that touch the life of citizens directly. And this is something that we had lots of discussions in Kakheti, in fact, with the local action group. Lagodehi is where we visited the park, and we met with a group of really engaged and interested citizens, with the local mayor, and discussed how to, expand and even replicate the type of programs that we have with them, where relatively small amount of money can actually spur a lot of local activism, a lot of local enthusiasm, and a lot of development of local solutions. Because let's be realistic, whether it's a small country like Georgia or a bigger country or even smaller country, from the central office you never can know what exactly is the problem of the local citizens. It was, interesting surprise for us when we asked someone from the governor's office who told us that street dogs is a big problem in Tel Aviv. Something that a bureaucrat in Brussels would not think.
Will not consider.
Right?
Yes.
And if we have an instrument to support local initiative, mobilization of local citizens, we can easily provide a tool that people can take care of something that is really important to them on a local level.
That's really a music, sounds like a music to my ears, and being in the EU integration business. I'm really happy that EU support, EU assistance is not decreasing, it is increasing. In 2014, 2017, through the EU Eastern Neighborhood instrument, Georgia has received, you mentioned the sectors of support, and touching the sectors of support, it was up to 410 million euros provided for Georgia in those 3 years. And this year also Georgia is receiving about 45 million euros in the macrofinance assistance. What should we expect in the upcoming years? What kind of assistance, and in which approximately in which amounts it can be considered for Georgia in nearest futures, and which sectors?
Okay, I need to stop right now.
Sure.
In fact, the support that we provide to Georgia from the European Union resources is very substantial. You mentioned a very large figure. Let me just say that, in fact, in the year 2018, Georgia is receiving per capita by far the largest amount in the region, by far. And thanks to its reforms and sustained reforms over time, as President Juncker mentioned when he visited in May the 100th anniversary of the establishment of Georgia, this year Georgia received 40 million euro grants top up to its annual allocation out of what we call more for more envelope. Yeah. So this is an envelope that is held back in our programming and is attributed on an annual basis to the best performers. And I'm very happy to say that Georgia has been receiving this envelope for a number of years now, and I very much hope that it's going to continue receiving this amount. So, in fact, and let me just check that I have it correctly, the allocation for 2018 is 134 million euros in grants in bilateral envelope. In addition to that, Georgia receives a very significant part of the regional programs. For example, all of our EU for business support, credit lines in banks, etc., are part of the regional allocation of that goes through our international financial institution partners, And that's on top of this 134 million. And on top of that is the macrofinancial assistance that you mentioned. So in fact, it is really shy of 200 million that Georgia receives in grants this year from the European Union.
Sounds great, really great. And it is important that Georgia as a country, as a state, is receiving this kind of important amounts for its development, for its reforms. But it is absolutely essential that the Georgian businesses are receiving the loans for doing the projects like in the energy efficiency. And I know that you have your very important say in this project. This is, I think, one of the most successful investments and projects. How do you evaluate this project, and what's your impression on that?
Well, you just touched on two issues that are close to my heart. One issue is making sure that small and medium-sized businesses have access to finance. And as I mentioned, we do it through our bilateral programs. For example, the microfinance in Lari that should be rolling out in the fall, I think is going to be important. And in Kakheti, we visited a wine producer, a fairly substantial wine producer, and you can kill me, I'm not going to remember the name.
It's okay.
But it was a producer that in the season employs over 90 people, and actually most of his wine goes for exports, about 3/4 to Russia, the rest to the European Union. And the ability to expand the business and get new equipment to launch new production was facilitated through what we call the DCFTA facility. DCFTA is a horrible acronym. It stands for the Deep and Comprehensive Free Trade Area between Georgia and the European Union. And we set up a facility with EBRD and with the European Investment Bank to help local businesses not only get access to money, but be able to accommodate the higher standards, right? To be able to adapt to the standards that the European Union has, so you can then export to European markets. So it was very nice to see that in reality, something that we proposed and we supported. Now, the second issue that you mentioned is energy efficiency. I call myself an energy efficiency evangelist. And I have been talking about energy efficiency to many governments, including the Georgian government and many ministers on the way, including today and yesterday. And I really think this is an area where the potential is not really exploited in Georgia, because there are three big consumer areas, consumption of energy, three sectors: industry, transport, and buildings. And especially in the sector of buildings, which is the one that doesn't respond to market signals easily, Georgia has a disproportionate consumption of energy, 40% compared to the others. And this very quickly shows that there is huge potential for improvement and for lowering, for two things: for lowering the cost of energy, hence lowering the dependence on imports from energy, which in this part of the world is very important, I think. And second, it essentially doesn't exploit the opportunity to create new professions like energy auditors, new businesses like producing energy efficient materials, and new jobs for people who would, in the regions, in the municipalities across the country, involve themselves in rehabilitating the businesses and making them energy efficient. This is not one place where some jobs are created. These are investments that are distributed and can be distributed across the country and can support job creation, business establishment, new professions, and at the same time increase energy independence. And so we very much hope to nudge the authorities and the businesses along this way, because it has a big promise.
But they are ready to cooperate in that direction, I hope very much. I want to make a correction that through EIB was the funded, that provided the loan for the rehabilitation of the road outside of Tbilisi after this disaster, natural disaster. EIB, EBRD, both are having very large portfolios and are doing a lot inside the country, with the country and with the governmental institutions, with the businesses. Recently was made the special poll for the Georgia's EU integration level. And the research is saying that Georgia is doing quite, European Union is popular, Georgians believe in the European Union's integration and its future in the European Union. I must honestly and frankly say that still Georgians do not know enough about what is European financial institutions, European Union itself is doing. And in this term, the propaganda, anti-EU, anti-Europe propaganda is doing quite well on its part. So is European Union is planning to support the projects in raising the awareness about the DCFTA, about the importance of the association agreement, about the whole process of Georgia's EU integration?
It's interesting you say that, because this is a topic that we discussed quite actively yesterday.
I have no sources inside the government.
One thing that the European Union is not great about is communication. I must say that, I must admit that openly. We wouldn't have Brexit if we communicated better. And so I very much agree that we need to do a lot more about communicating what we do, how we do things, why we do it, and what are the benefits. And yesterday we had a meeting with the new Minister of Finance, and the first thing he said, the first thing when we sat down, he says, look, I come from the private sector, and preparing for this meeting, it's only then when I realized how much the EU invests in Georgia. And that was, it didn't surprise me, but it was really another element, sort of a wake-up call saying, wait a second. And then also in the meeting with the Prime Minister, we discussed really the need to invest in information, awareness raising, storytelling about what are the benefits for citizens, what are the benefits for communities, what the EU stands for. And I think you mentioned it yourself, we are not operating in a neutral environment. We have your big neighbor to the north that's very actively pushing its own narrative. Facts are not important in that. And I think it's really upon us collectively to do better about saying how important EU is for Georgia, but also how important Georgia is for the EU. And in terms of concrete investments, we have now put together something called external investment plan, where through our international financial institutions partners, we will be putting on the table really a new product, which is de-risking of the private sector to get into the business. So that's a very exciting prospect for us. And we also have developed and have an agreement with the Georgian government, and I will close on that, have an agreement with the Georgian government of selecting 4 regions as focus regions for our assistance. This is not to say we will only invest in these 4 regions. On the contrary, but what we want to do is create linkages between our investments in these 4 regions, and I'm talking about Guria, Racha, Imereti, and Kakheti, to create linkages among the various bits and investments, and also build capacity in these regions for the decentralization that's planned and underway, and also really focus on projects that bring change to the lives of ordinary citizens. And there is no better example for that than the stray dogs in Tel Aviv. Right. I mean, if this is an issue that really is important both for the tourist sector and for their going about their own lives, then why not support that through a local initiative?
I was really lucky and really happy to hear that among those 4 regions, one is Racha, which I'm originally from, and I'm more than sure, more than happy that you are focusing on the regions to develop them, to decentralize the ruling of the regions, and it's really will be very helpful. I appreciate your time. I appreciate the great news which you are providing through our talk show. I want to assure you that in raising the awareness of European Union leads in Georgia, you have a great partner like media in Georgia. Excellent. And in particular TV Pirelli, our television and our talk show and Business Morning. And thank you very much for your time and for the very interesting interview.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gamarjos.
Thank you.